Welcome, my friends, and let me regale you with a tale of love that blossomed from the most unlikely of circumstances. Enjoy the story. Emily stepped off the creaky old bus, pulling her threadbare coat tightly around her slender frame as an icy gust of wind whipped through the deserted street. She hurried down the cracked sidewalk, her worn boots crunching on the thin layer of snow that blanketed the ground. As she turned the corner onto Maple Avenue, her small house came into view. It wasn't much to look at, a simple one-story structure with faded blue siding and a sagging front porch. But to Emily, it was home. It was the place where she had grown up, where her mother had raised her single-handedly after her father walked out on them when she was just a baby. Emily's heart ached as she thought of her mother, who had passed away just a year ago after a long battle with cancer. She had left Emily the house, along with a small sum of money that barely covered the funeral expenses. But Emily was grateful for what she had, and she worked hard at her job as a waitress to make ends meet. As she approached the front door, Emily noticed that the porch light was out. She sighed, making a mental note to replace the bulb in the morning. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, greeted by the familiar scent of lavender and vanilla, her mother's favorite candle scents. Emily kicked off her boots and hung up her coat, then made her way to the kitchen to fix herself a cup of tea. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly midnight. She had worked a double shift at the diner today, and her feet were aching from standing for so long. She settled onto the worn couch in the living room, cradling her steaming mug of chamomile tea in her hands. As she sipped the soothing liquid, her mind wandered to her friends from high school. Most of them were married now, with children of their own. They had moved on to bigger and better things, leaving Emily behind in this sleepy little town. But Emily didn't mind. She had always been a homebody, content with her simple life. She had her job, her little house, and her memories of her mother to keep her company. She didn't need anything else. As she finished her tea and set the mug down on the coffee table, Emily's eyes fell on a framed photo of her mother. She was smiling broadly, her eyes crinkled at the corners. Emily felt a lump form in her throat as she gazed at the picture. "I miss you, Mom," she whispered, reaching out to touch the cool glass of the frame. With a heavy heart, Emily rose from the couch and made her way to her bedroom. She changed into her favorite flannel pajamas and crawled under the covers, hugging her pillow tightly to her chest. As she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing from her life. But what that something was, she couldn't quite put her finger on. The next evening, Emily found herself working another late shift at the diner. It had been a slow night, with only a handful of customers coming in for a quick bite or a cup of coffee. Emily was looking forward to closing up and heading home to her warm bed. As she wiped down the counter for the 100th time, the bell above the door jingled, signaling the arrival of a new customer. Emily looked up, expecting to see one of the regulars. But instead, she found herself looking at a tall, poorly dressed young man with shaggy brown hair and piercing blue eyes. The man shuffled over to a booth in the corner and sat down heavily, his shoulders slumped. Emily grabbed a menu and made her way over to him, plastering a smile on her face. "Welcome to Rosie's Diner," she said cheerfully. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man looked up at her, his eyes filled with a sadness that made Emily's heart ache. "Just a cup of coffee, please," he said quietly. Emily nodded and hurried off to grab a mug and a pot of fresh coffee. As she poured the steaming liquid into the mug, she couldn't help but wonder what had brought this man to the diner so late at night. He looked like he had been through hell and back. She returned to the booth and set the mug down in front of him. "Here you go," she said. "Let me know if you need anything else." The man nodded, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "Thank you," he said softly. Emily hesitated for a moment, then slid into the booth across from him. "I'm Emily," she said, extending her hand. The man looked at her hand for a moment, before shaking it firmly. "Jack," he replied. "It's nice to meet you, Jack," Emily said. "I haven't seen you around here before. Are you new in town?" Jack shook his head. "Just passing through," he said. "I don't really have a place to call home." Emily's heart clenched at his words. She knew what it was like to feel alone in the world. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said softly. Is there anything I can do to help?" Jack looked at her, his eyes searching her face. "You're very kind," he said, "but I don't think there's anything anyone can do for me now." Emily bit her lip, feeling a sudden urge to comfort this stranger. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "Here," she said, holding them out to him. "It's not much, but it should be enough for a hot meal and a place to stay for the night." Jack stared at the money in her hand, his eyes wide with surprise. "I can't take your money," he said, shaking his head. "Please," Emily insisted. "I want to help." Slowly, Jack reached out and took the bills from her hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Emily smiled at him, feeling a warmth spreading through her chest. "You're welcome," she said. "And if you ever need anything else, you know where to find me." With that, she slid out of the booth and went back to work, her heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. Over the next few weeks, Jack became a regular at the diner. He would come in every evening, always sitting in the same booth in the corner. Emily looked forward to his visits, and she would often find herself lingering at his table, chatting with him about everything and nothing. She learned that Jack was originally from New York City, but he had fallen on hard times and had been living on the streets for the past year. He had come to this small town in search of work, but so far he hadn't had any luck. Emily's heart went out to him, and she found herself doing everything she could to help him. She would bring him extra food from the kitchen, and she even gave him some of her brother's old clothes that she had been meaning to donate. One evening, as they were chatting over a slice of apple pie, Emily noticed a small puppy wandering around outside the diner. She gasped and jumped up from the booth, rushing outside to scoop up the shivering animal. "Poor thing," she cooed, cradling the puppy against her chest. "You must be so cold and hungry." She brought the puppy back inside and set it down on the booth next to Jack. The puppy immediately curled up in his lap, its tail wagging happily. "Looks like you've made a new friend," Emily said, smiling at the sight. Jack chuckled, scratching the puppy behind its ears. "I guess so," he said. "What should we call him?" Emily thought for a moment. "How about Midnight?" she suggested. "Because of his black fur." Jack nodded. "Midnight it is," he said. From that moment on, Midnight became a constant companion to both Emily and Jack. They would take turns feeding him and playing with him, and they even took him on walks together in the park. As the weeks turned into months, Emily and Jack grew closer and closer. They would spend hours talking and laughing together, and Emily found herself looking forward to his visits more and more. She knew that her friends and coworkers thought it was strange that she was spending so much time with a homeless man. But she didn't care. She saw something special in Jack, something that went beyond his current circumstances. And as she looked into his eyes one evening, she realized that she was falling in love with him. It was a chilly autumn morning when Jack showed up at Emily's doorstep, a nervous smile on his face. Emily was surprised to see him so early in the day, but she invited him inside without hesitation. "Is everything okay?" she asked, noticing the way he was fidgeting with something in his pocket. Jack took a deep breath and pulled out a small, crudely fashioned ring made from a piece of aluminum foil. He got down on one knee in front of Emily, his eyes shining with love and hope. "Emily," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I know I don't have much to offer you. I'm just a homeless man with nothing to my name. But I love you more than anything in this world, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at the man she had come to love so deeply. She knew that many people would think she was crazy for even considering his proposal, but in that moment, none of that mattered. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Jack." Jack's face split into a grin as he slipped the makeshift ring onto her finger. He stood up and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. "I love you so much," he murmured against her lips. "I promise I will do everything in my power to give you the life you deserve." Emily hugged him tightly, her heart bursting with happiness. She knew that their life together wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that with Jack by her side, she could face anything. The day of their wedding arrived, and Emily was a bundle of nerves as she got ready at the courthouse. She had chosen a simple white sundress and a pair of sandals, not wanting to make a big fuss over the occasion. As she waited for Jack to arrive, she couldn't help but feel a little anxious. What if he had changed his mind? What if he didn't show up? But her fears were quickly put to rest when a sleek black limousine pulled up in front of the courthouse. The driver got out and opened the back door, revealing a sharply dressed Jack in a tailored suit and shiny black shoes. Emily's jaw dropped as she took in the sight of him. "Jack?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on?" Jack grinned at her, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "I have a confession to make," he said, taking her hand in his. "I'm not really homeless. In fact, I'm a wealthy businessman from New York City." Emily stared at him in shock, her mind reeling. "But why did you pretend to be homeless?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Jack's expression turned serious. "I wanted to find someone who would love me for who I am, not for my money," he said. "And when I met you, I knew that you were that person. You showed me kindness and compassion when no one else would, and you loved me even when you thought I had nothing to offer you." Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes as she listened to his words. "I do love you, Jack," she said softly. "I love you for your heart, not your bank account." Jack smiled at her, his own eyes glistening with tears. "I know," he said, "and that's why I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, starting with this wedding." He led her to the waiting limousine, where all of their friends and loved ones were waiting to celebrate with them. As they drove off to the lavish reception Jack had planned, Emily couldn't stop smiling. She had found her happily ever after, and it was even better than she could have ever imagined. Years later, Emily and Jack were the picture of marital bliss. They had 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl, and they lived in a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of town. But despite their wealth and success, they never forgot where they came from. They would often take their children to the park where they had first met, telling them the story of how a kind-hearted waitress had fallen in love with a homeless man. And every year on their anniversary, they would return to that same park bench where Jack had once slept, leaving a bouquet of flowers and a note for anyone who might be struggling like he once had.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry." Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.